So we're going to talk about a conflict that really shaped the world for almost half a century. But this wasn't your typical war. It wasn't about massive armies clashing on a battlefield. In fact, it was all about the battles that never happened. This is the story of the frozen conflict. It's a pretty strange idea, right? A Cold War. The words don't even seem to go together. How can you have a massive global conflict that divides the entire planet, but the main players never actually fight each other directly? Well, stick around because that's exactly what we're going to figure out. Okay, so to get this, you have to kind of throw out the old idea of what a war looks like. Forget the traditional battlefields. The fight was happening everywhere, all at once, just never face to face. So what was the Cold War really? Think of it like a 46-year staring contest between the two new superpowers that emerged after World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union. And the number one rule of this whole rivalry was simple. You do not fight each other directly. This was a war fought with money, with propaganda, with spies, with influence, basically with everything except direct combat. Now, this tension, it didn't just stay between Washington and Moscow. Oh no. It drew a line right down the middle of the globe, and pretty much every country was forced to pick a side. At its heart, this was a battle of two completely opposite ideas for how the world should run. You had the USA and its allies, who were all about capitalism and democracy, individual freedoms, free markets, that kind of thing. And on the other side, you had the Soviet Union and its allies, who were pushing for socialism and one-party rule. State controlled the collective over the individual. These weren't just small disagreements. They were two totally different blueprints for the future of humanity. And that clash, it fueled everything. And pretty soon, this split in ideas became a military one. You can see it perfectly right here. Two massive power blocs formed. The Western Bloc, led by the US, formed a military alliance called NATO. And to counter that, the Eastern Bloc, led by the USSR, created their own version, the Warsaw Pact. The teams were set. The lines were drawn in the sand. So if they couldn't fight each other head-on, how did they compete? Well, it was like a really, really dangerous game with its own unique set of rules. The two superpowers basically wrote a whole new playbook for how to wage war. Instead of fighting, they tried to one-up each other in every other way imaginable. They built bigger and bigger armies and arsenals in a crazy arms race. They used economic aid to try and buy friends and allies around the world. They launched massive propaganda campaigns to win hearts and minds. But the most dangerous tactic of all was fighting through other countries, turning local conflicts into what we now call proxy wars. And these proxy wars started popping up all over the planet, turning smaller regional conflicts into these huge superpower battlegrounds. The Korean War was really the first big one. The peninsula became this brutal testing ground for American and Soviet influence, and it set a really bloody precedent for the decades that followed. Then, of course, there was Vietnam, a conflict that just spiraled into one of the longest and most brutal wars of the 20th century, again with the superpowers pulling the strings and supplying the weapons on both sides. And later on, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, the US jumped in to arm the local resistance fighters. You see the pattern here? In every one of these devastating wars, the US and the USSR were like puppet masters, fighting their war by remote control while other people paid the ultimate price. But underneath all this scheming and all these proxy fights, there was one single terrifying threat that kept the superpowers from ever going to war with each other. It was the ultimate checkmate. And that was the absolutely terrifying logic of mutually assured destruction, or MAD. The name says it all, right? The idea was as simple as it was horrifying. If either side launched its nuclear weapons, the other side would launch theirs right back. The result? Total, complete annihilation for both countries and probably most of the world. It was that fear, that absolute certainty of global suicide that kept the Cold War from ever turning hot. But here's the thing. Not every country wanted to be a pawn in this crazy superpower chess game. A lot of them just flat out refused to play. Think about it. For dozens of nations just gaining their independence from colonial rule, being told you had to choose between Team USA and Team USSR, well, it felt a lot like trading one old boss for a new one. So they rejected the choice completely and decided to carve out their own way. And this became the Non-Aligned Movement, or NAM. It was started by nations that refused to officially pick a side. You had major figures like Nero in India, Tito in Yugoslavia, and Nasser in Egypt leading the charge. And their goal was simple, but it was also revolutionary for the time. Stay independent, promote peace, And for God's sake, stay out of the superpowers' military alliances. So after more than 40 years of this icy tension, this global standoff, the whole thing started to thaw. The foundation began to crack. It was time for the final endgame. And when the end came, it came fast. I mean, unbelievably fast. In the mid-1980s, the new Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, he starts these radical reforms. You might have heard of them. Glasnost, which meant more openness, and perestroika, which was about restructuring the economy. But these ideas unleashed something he couldn't control. And then in 1989, the Berlin Wall, the ultimate symbol of this divided world, came tumbling down. Just 2 years after that, in 1991, the Soviet Union itself officially dissolved. Just like that, the game was over. So what happened next? What did the world look like? Well, that two-player game board was gone. The bipolar world vanished. The Soviet Union collapsed, leaving the USA as the world's only superpower, at least for a while. But that power vacuum also opened the door for new countries and new powers to step onto the world stage. The entire global chessboard was reset. So, the Cold War officially ended decades ago. It's in the history books, but its legacy, its impact, that's all around us. Which brings us to one final question to think about. The game might be over, but are we still hearing its echoes in the conflicts and alliances that shape our world today?